August 2018 began like any other summer in Frederick, Colorado, a quiet suburban community where families shared backyard barbecues, children rode their bikes through neat streets, and neighbors believed they knew one another. Inside one of those homes lived a young family that from the outside appeared ordinary and even happy. A 34-year-old mother worked from home selling health and wellness products online and often shared moments of daily life with friends and followers on social media. Her videos showed school mornings, family dinners, and affectionate interactions with her husband and two daughters. The girls, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, were energetic, playful children who filled the home with noise and laughter. The family was also expecting a third child, a baby boy they planned to name Nico. To those watching from the outside, the household looked like a portrait of modern family life. Yet behind the carefully curated images, the marriage had begun to fracture. Financial stress, emotional distance, and the quiet unraveling of trust had created tension that few people fully understood at the time. The husband had recently started a new job in the oil industry and had undergone a dramatic personal transformation, losing weight and becoming more focused on fitness and independence. Around the same period, he had begun an affair with a coworker. While he was presenting himself publicly as a devoted husband and father, his private life was shifting in ways that would soon have devastating consequences. In early August 2018, the pregnant mother returned from a business trip in Arizona. According to records later examined by investigators, she arrived home in the early morning hours of August 13th. Within a matter of hours, she vanished. When a concerned friend arrived at the house later that day and could not reach her, alarm bells began to ring. Her phone, purse, and car were still at home, and the children were missing as well. The situation quickly escalated into a missing persons investigation that drew immediate attention from local police and neighbors. As officers searched the home and questioned the husband, he appeared calm and cooperative, speaking with reporters and pleading for his family's safe return. Standing in front of television cameras, he asked anyone with information to help bring his wife and daughters back home. Those early interviews would later become some of the most unsettling moments associated with the case. Within days, however, investigators began to uncover evidence that pointed in a far darker direction. What initially began as a desperate search for a missing mother and her children soon revealed itself to be something far more disturbing. Beneath the quiet suburban routine, a calculated and deeply violent crime had taken place, one that would shock the nation and permanently alter the lives of everyone connected to the family. The discovery of what happened inside that home would expose not only the brutality of the acts themselves, but also the disturbing reality that the person responsible had been living among them all along. As investigators moved deeper into the case, the evidence collected by law enforcement quickly transformed a missing persons investigation into a homicide inquiry. Within days of the disappearance, inconsistencies began to appear in the husband's statements to police. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera showed him backing his work truck into the driveway during the early morning hours of August 13th, something he later attempted to explain as routine preparation for work. However, detectives noted that the timing of the footage aligned precisely with the window during which his wife and daughters were believed to have vanished. Police also obtained cell phone records, text messages, and digital communications that revealed the extent of his secret relationship with a coworker. Investigators learned that while his pregnant wife was out of state on business shortly before the murders, he had spent significant time with this woman discussing plans for a future together. Financial records and internet searches further revealed that he had been exploring ways to begin a new life free from his current family responsibilities. During questioning, the suspect initially denied any involvement. He repeated claims that his wife had left the house with the children after an emotional argument. But as the pressure from investigators intensified, he agreed to take a polygraph examination. According to official reports later presented in court documents, he failed the test. Confronted with the results and mounting evidence, his story began to collapse. Shortly afterward, he confessed to killing his pregnant wife inside the family home. Investigators would later determine through autopsy findings that she died from strangulation. Court records also confirmed that she had been 15 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. After killing her, he transported her body to a remote oil field where he worked. Prosecutors later described this location as part of a calculated effort to conceal the crime using a place he was familiar with through his employment. The fate of the two young girls was even more devastating. According to the official confession and investigative reports, they were taken to the same oil site. There, the children were killed and their bodies placed inside large crude oil storage tanks. The narrow openings of those tanks required deliberate effort to conceal the bodies, a detail prosecutors later emphasized during the legal proceedings to demonstrate the level of planning involved. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the defendant ultimately accepted a plea agreement in November 2018. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and tampering with deceased human remains. In exchange for the guilty plea, prosecutors agreed not to pursue the death penalty. Later that month, the court delivered its final judgment. The sentence included 5 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole, along with additional decades for related charges. During sentencing, the judge described the crime as one of the most brutal and senseless cases the court had ever encountered, emphasizing both the calculated nature of the acts and the profound harm inflicted on the victims and their families. The legal process had reached its conclusion, but the story surrounding the case was far from over. In the days following the arrests and confession, the case quickly became one of the most widely covered crimes in recent American media. National news networks, investigative reporters, and crime analysts closely followed every development, from the initial missing persons report to the discovery of the bodies and the eventual court proceedings. The quiet Colorado neighborhood where the family had lived was suddenly flooded with reporters, camera crews, and investigators, turning an ordinary suburban street into the center of a global news story. Early coverage focused heavily on the dramatic shift from a husband pleading for help on television to the same man becoming the prime suspect in the deaths of his family. Footage of those early interviews circulated repeatedly across news broadcasts and social media. Viewers began analyzing his demeanor, tone, and body language in an attempt to understand how someone who appeared calm and composed could be responsible for such violence. The case quickly became a subject of intense public scrutiny, with commentators dissecting every moment captured on camera. As more details emerged from law enforcement sources and court filings, media outlets began constructing a clearer timeline of the days leading up to the murders. Reports revealed that the marriage had been under strain for months and that the husband had been involved in a secret relationship with another woman. Journalists uncovered text messages and phone records indicating that he had been discussing a possible future with this co-worker while still presenting himself publicly as a devoted family man. News coverage also highlighted the digital trail left behind by the couple, including social media posts that documented their daily lives in vivid detail. Another major turning point in media coverage occurred when investigators released information about the location where the bodies were discovered. The remote oil field where he worked became a central focus of reporting, particularly because it showed how familiar he was with the area and how it could be used to conceal evidence. This revelation deepened the public's understanding of the level of planning involved in the crime and further intensified the emotional reaction from viewers following the story. Public response was swift and overwhelmingly emotional. Community members held vigils to honor the victims, leaving flowers, candles, and stuffed animals near the family home. Across the country, people expressed grief and anger over the loss of 2 young children and their unborn brother. The case became a powerful example discussed in news panels and crime analysis programs about how family violence can remain hidden behind seemingly normal lives. Even after the sentencing concluded in late 2018, media interest did not fade. Investigative articles and documentaries continued exploring unanswered questions about the motive, the psychology behind the crime, and the events that unfolded inside the home that night. Over time, journalists began shifting attention toward what happened after the conviction, examining how the convicted killer adapted to life behind bars and how the case continued to affect both families years after the tragedy. As the case continued to draw attention in the years following the conviction, interviews with people connected to the story revealed a deeper emotional dimension behind the headlines. Family members, investigators, journalists, and even individuals who had communicated with the convicted killer began sharing insights into the personality and behavior that many believed had gone unnoticed before the tragedy. One of the most powerful voices throughout the aftermath came from the victim's family. In interviews given after the sentencing, her father spoke openly about the pain of losing not only his daughter, but also his 2 granddaughters and the unborn grandson they had been eagerly awaiting. Despite the unimaginable loss, he made it clear that he did not wish for revenge in the form of execution. Instead, he said he wanted the man responsible to spend the rest of his life in prison, thinking about the consequences of what he had done. His words reflected both grief and a quiet determination that the victims be remembered for who they were, not only for the way their lives ended. Friends and neighbors also spoke about the family they believed they knew. Many described the mother as energetic and deeply devoted to her children. Through social media posts and everyday interactions, she often shared moments of family life, celebrating birthdays, school activities, and ordinary routines. Several acquaintances said they had never seen signs that the household was in immediate danger, which made the eventual revelations even more difficult to comprehend. Investigators who worked on the case later described the emotional toll the crime had taken on everyone involved in the search. Officers initially approached the situation as a missing persons investigation, hoping that the mother and children might still be found alive. As evidence began pointing toward a far darker outcome, the focus shifted to uncovering the truth and ensuring that the victims received justice. Detectives noted that the turning point came when inconsistencies in the husband's statements began to surface during questioning, prompting a deeper investigation into his actions and movements during the critical hours when the family disappeared. Another unusual aspect of the case emerged from individuals who began corresponding with the convicted killer after his imprisonment. One woman who exchanged letters with him and later visited him in prison described the experience as surreal. She recalled that during conversations about the murders, his demeanor sometimes shifted in unsettling ways. According to her account, he could speak about the crimes with a detached tone that felt disturbingly ordinary, as though he were discussing routine events rather than acts of extreme violence. Interviews with people who had interacted with him behind bars also suggested that he formed intense attachments to individuals who wrote to him, particularly women who expressed sympathy or curiosity about his case. These accounts painted a complex and troubling portrait of someone who continued to seek emotional connection and validation, even after being sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. In November 2018, the legal process reached its final stage when the court delivered its sentence. The judge imposed multiple life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring that the man responsible would never again live outside the walls of a prison. With the plea agreement already in place, the courtroom proceedings focused not on proving guilt, but on acknowledging the devastation left behind. Statements from the victims' relatives filled the room with grief as they described the lives that had been taken and the future that would never come. By the time the hearing concluded, the outcome was clear. He would spend the remainder of his life incarcerated, facing the consequences of his actions. Shortly after sentencing, correctional authorities made the decision to transfer him out of Colorado. The case had generated extraordinary public outrage, and officials were concerned that keeping him in the same state where the crimes occurred could create security risks within the prison system. Within weeks, he was moved to a maximum security correctional institution in Wisconsin under an interstate agreement between prison systems. There, he would begin the long and quiet routine of life behind bars. Inside the facility, his days became structured by the strict schedule of the prison environment. Reports from corrections officials indicate that he participates in basic institutional routines, such as work assignments, meals, recreation periods, and monitored phone calls. He has also taken part in religious services and Bible study programs offered to inmates. Unlike some high-profile prisoners who are placed in isolation for their own protection, he has reportedly lived within the general prison population, navigating the same environment as hundreds of other inmates serving lengthy sentences. Over time, information about his life in prison has surfaced through interviews, public records, and statements from individuals who have corresponded with him. Some accounts suggest he spends much of his time writing letters, maintaining communication with people outside the facility who have reached out to him after learning about the case. These exchanges have drawn attention because they illustrate how the story has continued to fascinate the public long after the court proceedings ended. Meanwhile, the victims' families have focused on preserving the memory of the lives that were lost. In the years since the murders, relatives have spoken about their efforts to move forward while continuing to honor the mother, her 2 daughters, and the unborn child who never had the chance to be born. Their message has remained consistent. The focus should remain on remembering the victims rather than giving lasting attention to the man who ended their lives. Today, the case stands as one of the most disturbing examples of family violence in recent memory. The legal chapter concluded with a sentence that will keep the perpetrator imprisoned for the rest of his life, but the emotional impact of what happened continues to ripple through the families involved and the community that once believed it knew the people living behind that quiet suburban door. When looking back at this case years later, one of the most unsettling aspects is how ordinary everything once appeared. The family lived in a typical suburban neighborhood, shared photos of their lives online, and seemed to represent the kind of stability many people assume is safe and predictable. Yet behind that normal image, a quiet breakdown was unfolding that eventually led to one of the most disturbing acts of family violence in recent memory. Cases like this force a difficult question. How can someone who appears calm, polite, and unremarkable commit such irreversible harm against the very people who trusted him most? Forensic psychologists often point out that crimes like these rarely emerge from a single moment of anger. Instead, they tend to grow from a combination of personal pressures, emotional detachment, and a mindset that gradually begins to view family members not as loved ones, but as obstacles. In many family annihilation cases, the perpetrator begins to imagine a different life, one without financial stress, relationship conflict, or parental responsibility. When that fantasy collides with reality, some individuals choose a path that eliminates the people they believe stand in the way of their future. It is a chilling distortion of responsibility and empathy. Another striking element in this case is the way the narrative shifted after the murders were discovered. At different points, responsibility was subtly redirected toward others, toward relationship problems, toward the pressures of marriage, even toward the people who were ultimately the victims. This pattern reflects a psychological defense mechanism that investigators and psychologists frequently observe in violent offenders. By shifting blame, the individual protects their self-image and avoids confronting the full weight of what they have done. There is also an important social lesson within the public response to this case. The widespread attention it received showed how strongly people react when violence occurs within a family. Society expects parents to protect their children above all else, and when that trust is broken, the reaction is one of profound shock and anger. Yet the intense fascination surrounding such crimes can sometimes overshadow the memory of the victims themselves. The real tragedy is not the notoriety of the offender, but the loss of 4 lives that should have continued for decades. Ultimately, the outcome of the case is final. The person responsible will spend the rest of his life inside a prison, removed from the world he once lived in. But the deeper meaning of this story lies beyond the prison walls. It serves as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that unresolved personal conflicts can grow into destructive forces, and that the consequences of violence within a family extend far beyond the moment the crime occurs. The victims deserved long lives filled with ordinary moments, birthdays, school days, and quiet evenings at home. Remembering that lost future is perhaps the most important way to understand the true weight of what happened.